And it was expensive because it was manual. And almost all data was structured that could fit in rows and columns. And the number of rows were limited. And there was no text data, there was no images, no audio, no video data. So we had small data. But today, computers are much smaller and much cheaper. Memory is cheaper. You can get a terabyte of memory on your flash card these days for like $40. And data collection is mostly automated now. So it is cheaper, data collection is cheaper. And we have much more structured data than in the past. So the number of rows is now into millions and hundreds of millions and even billions. So Facebook has over 1 billion members and it has a record on each one of them. And now there's text data, image data, audio data, and video data. In other words, we have big data. So what's the big deal? Okay, so what? What do we do with that? I mean, data is data. I mean, it just looks like a lifeless thing, just zeros and ones sitting on a disk. So why is such a big deal about big data, or any data for that matter? So how does it help anybody? So let me try to give a big picture of what we do. So we live in what we call the real world, which is extremely complex. There's too many variables for any one person to understand or comprehend. But to improve our lives, we want to understand our real world so that we can shape it the way we want. But because it is so complex, we try to abstract certain things of interest. So we call it abstraction, and these things of interest we represent as data. So the data is like an abstraction of the reality. And once we have data, we can analyze it to understand the relationships between the variables better. And we develop a story or some information, or we develop a worldview. And based on that information, we make certain decisions to improve the real world. And this cycle continues forever. And this is not new. We've been doing this for thousands of years. But what is happening now is, as the cost of data collection and storage is declining, the degree of abstraction is reducing. So the same real world, now we are capturing more granular data. So the granularity is becoming finer, so the abstraction is reducing, and we get bigger data. So we can do finer analysis than we did in the past. So we have more information, we have more detailed story, and more detailed worldview. But we're still making decisions, but based on more data. So this continues. As the cost further declines, we can get even more granular data, right? So even finer granularity. So we can do even finer analytics with the big data. And now we start to get insights. Okay, in the past we were just getting some information. Now we're getting patterns, hidden patterns, insights. So we can do more with these insights to make the real world even better. So that's the value of more data, more granular data. And I will explain the value through a tennis example. How many of you play tennis? Okay, how many of you follow tennis? All right, so you all understand the game of tennis. Okay, so let's suppose there was a match, and somebody asked, well, what was the result? And I can say, oh, the match score was 6-4, 6-3, 6-2. So that's some information, okay? It's just an abstraction of the match. The match was a real thing. This represents data about the match at a very high level. Now we can go a little bit deeper and get a more granular data at the game level. So this 6-4, these are 10 games. What was the score on each game? So I have an example of granular data. Now, how is this more granular data more useful? So suppose I'll take a pathological example. Let's suppose I have a match score of 6-0, 6-0, 6-0. A very one-sided game, obviously. And let's suppose tomorrow or next week, the same two players were playing again, and I could bet on this match. So based on this information, obviously I'm going to bet on the player who won 6-0, 6-0, 6-0. But suppose I had a more granular data, the game score, and let's suppose I find that not only was it 6-0, 6-0, 6-0, every game was 40 love, 40 love, 40 love, and so on. It's a pathological case, it doesn't happen, but let's suppose it did. So if I had this data, I would be even more confident in betting for the player one. But let's suppose my granular data told me that the score was deuce on every game, and it went to advantage. It just so happened that player one won every single game, but it was a close game. So the fact that it was a close game is revealed in this granular data, which is not revealed in a higher abstraction level data. Okay? So next time, I'm not going to bet on player one because this game could have gone either way. Okay? So that's the advantage of higher granularity. And you can make it even more granular. You can say what happened on each point. Okay, who won the first point, the second point, third point, and so on. You can make it even more granular and say which one was an ace, which was a winner, unforced errors, winner, winner. And you might start seeing some patterns. For example, you might see a pattern that every time there was an ace, the following serve was not an ace. So if you were supposed, so you can even bet on, oh, next serve is not going to be an ace. So you can start betting on much finer things that you couldn't even think of if you didn't have all this data. So you can extend this example to almost any discipline where data is being collected. You can make more finer level decisions based on finer level patterns that you might detect. In fact, sports analytics is a big field these days, and big teams like NBA, NFL, they are hiring people who can do analytics on game data. And baseball especially, somebody wrote a book about how much analytics is used in baseball and how certain teams have performed very well because they've been studying data about these games. So what is big data? I've already talked about some of it. So we talk about the 4 V's of big data. Volume, obviously, that's what makes it big. Then velocity, the rate at which the data is coming. So satellites are generating petabytes of data every day. Every time a flight takes off from US and goes to someplace in Europe, a transcontinental flight, a petabyte of data is generated. Okay, there's thousands of flights every day. So the velocity at which data is being generated is humongous. Because of automation, because of sensor data, because of crowdsourcing, because of streaming data, mobile computing, social media, lots of data is being generated. Then there's variety. There's traditional data, structured rows and columns. Then there is text, image, audio, etc. About 20% of data is structured, about 80% is unstructured. So the majority is in text and images and videos and so on. And the 4th V is veracity, meaning the authenticity, the truthfulness of data. And actually, my friend Bhuvan has talked about a 5th V, value. Because there's value in the data, that's what makes it interesting. And we just talked about the value. Okay, so lots of V's to describe big data. So in terms of volume, you need a measure of how to denote volume. So I'll just introduce some things on how we measure data. So a byte is 1 character, 1000 bytes is a kilobyte, 1000 kilobytes is a megabyte, and 1000 megabytes is a gigabyte. Now most of us know up to a gigabyte, but 1000 gigabytes is a terabyte. And now some of us may know about a terabyte, because these days you buy a laptop, you get a terabyte. Now 1000 terabytes is a petabyte. Okay. Now, very few people have heard of a petabyte because that's just too large of a quantity for most of us. 1,000 petabytes has also a name. It's called an exabyte. And 1,000 exabyte is a zettabyte. Most people have not heard of this. 1,000 zettabyte is a yottabyte. Yotta. And then there's a name for 1,000 yottabytes. It's a brontobyte. So we are nowhere close to this. No, we can't even store it on planet Earth, even if we had that kind of data. And then there's a term for 1,000 brontobytes, geobytes. And so even the solar system is not enough for that kind of data. Okay. So how much data do we have on our planet? In 2005, estimated 130 exabytes. 5 years later, it more than doubled, 300 exabytes. And 1 year later, it multiplied 6 times. Another year, almost doubled. Another year, doubled. So we are close to 2020. We are estimating we have 40 zettabytes. And who knows, in another 5 years, we may be at a yottabyte. Okay. Now, it's hard for us to even imagine how large is a yottabyte. So how large is a yottabyte? Let's look at it. So a terabyte can fit on a hard drive, an external hard drive, or even a flash drive. So 1,000 of these will take a rack of these servers in a cabinet. 1,000 of these can fit in a 4-story building that occupies a block in a city. Okay. Now 1,000 such buildings, if you put them, will occupy 20% of Manhattan. Now imagine 1,000 of that is a yottabyte. It'll occupy the entire area of Delaware and Rhode Island. The entire area of Delaware and Rhode Island is filled with just 4-story buildings. That's it. So you can imagine 1,000 of these will take up the entire United States. That's it, just data. So it's just, so of course the good news is we don't store, a lot of the data gets deleted after some time because it's no longer useful. Okay, how much will it cost? So if you look at a terabyte, you can get for external hard drive about $100. Now this yottabyte is a trillion of these, trillion. So $100 trillion. $100 trillion. To put it in perspective, the GDP of United States is 14 trillion, Europe 18. Yes, it's slightly old. So 100 trillion is way more than the entire GDP of the planet Earth. So that's how much it's going to cost. Of course, the cost of memory is going down, so by the time we have yottabyte of data, it's not going to cost us 100 trillion. Okay, so just to give you the scale. So where do people store data? There are huge data centers. So government has data centers, big companies like Amazon, Google, Apple, Yahoo, they have huge data centers around the world. For example, here's a picture of an NSA Utah data center. This was built in 2014 at a cost of 1.5 billion. They're not only expensive to build, they're very expensive to maintain because they get very hot, and they have to be cooled down with air conditioning and so on, which uses a lot of electricity. It's not good for the environment. So they try to find places in high altitude and high latitude where they don't have to cool it that much. They don't want to have it near the equator. They're also experimenting with data centers that are underwater. Okay, so they can have it near the equator where it's more accessible. So data centers are expensive and hard to maintain. How are companies using big data? Lots of ways. Digital marketing, target advertising. As you know, Facebook, how many of you are active on Facebook? Okay, so you must have noticed how if you post a picture or somebody posts a picture, You can tag their faces, and it even suggests that is it this person, which means it's doing face recognition. Now, think about it. If they can recognize the face, which is much harder to do than recognizing the color of your shirt or the color of your shoes or the shape of your shoes. So every time you post a picture, they know so much more about you. So if they see a pattern, oh, this person likes blue shirts. Next time you're browsing the internet, you will see a picture of a blue shirt. If they figure out that you wear shoes without laces, which I do, I'm going to see pictures of shoes without laces, and that attract me more than if I saw a picture of a shoe with laces. So the granularity at which they can target you is just unbelievable. Okay? They can even tell your body weight and so much more about you. They can profile you to more detail than, in fact, I was reading somewhere that just by liking 25 things, they can profile you better than your spouse can. They know more about you than your spouse. So that's a kind of target. And Facebook is making most of its money by target advertising. It's an advertising company. It just knows so much more about you. It's unbelievable. Amazon. How many people buy from Amazon? Almost everybody. Yeah? So they know so much about your buying, purchasing habits, so much about your likes, dislikes, that they can target. And this system called customers who bought this item also bought. How many of you fell for that? I've fallen for it so many times, I don't even remember. Okay? If they didn't have that feature, I would not be buying a lot of things I bought. So they're adding value. That's one reason Amazon is valued the way it is valued. LinkedIn, companies you might be interested in, jobs you might be interested in, they know so much about your profile, they can target, and that's how they make a lot of money. So profiling. Insurance. Obviously, insurance is in the business of assessing your risk. And they now have these devices you can put in your cars, and some insurance companies require you to put that device so that they can monitor your driving habits. Each time you take a trip, they're generating more than a gigabyte of data. And if they have millions of customers who are making millions of trips, imagine the amount of data they're gathering. But they can profile your risk, your riskiness, and based on that, they can set the right premiums. So actually, you also benefit from that. So if you're a safe driver, they reward you. They can reduce your premium, right? And there's many more ways that companies are using big data. I'm sure you are familiar with many of those ways. So we talked about the 5 V's, well, 4 V's plus the value. The value is there, it's hidden. The only way the value comes out from its latent state is if you perform some analytics on it. So that's why you must have heard about big data analytics. So in the past, you could do analytics on structured data, but now you can do analytics on unstructured data. So in the past, you made decisions whether to invest in a company based on the numbers. Now you can read articles about that company and process the text data and decide if this is a good company to invest or not. So now they're processing text. So there's a whole field called text analytics. You're processing images, videos, audio. So there's millions of variables in the world, right? And there's billions of relationships between these variables. Not all of them are of interest to everybody. Not all of them are of interest to anybody. But there's some key relationships. There's some key relationships that are very useful to a lot of people. Okay. Now, almost all of research is about finding these interesting relationships. So the more data you have, the more granular data you have, the more relationships you can extract from the data. So there's whole science of descriptive analytics, how to describe data or visualize data. There's a whole field of visualization that has cropped up. There's a whole field of predictive analytics, finding patterns in large data sets. And there's a whole field of prescriptive analytics, Based on the pattern that you found, you can create policies or laws and take some actions. So descriptive analytics will tell us that the climate is getting warmer. Predictive analytics will say it's because of carbon emissions. There's a pattern between every time carbon emissions go up, the world gets hotter. So prescriptive would be, let's impose a tax on carbon emissions. So this cycle of descriptive, predictive, and prescriptive happens all the time in every field. So let me ask a question. A lot of people think that big data analytics is a revolutionary idea, it's a technology that can solve all of the world's problems. So there's big data, and you feed big data into these tools, and this tool will spit out solutions. Is that myth or reality? A few years ago, I saw a front page article on big data can cure cancer. Okay. So that falls into this kind of thing. Big data, feed it into some tools, and boom, cure for cancer. Popular magazines love these kinds of stories, but it's a myth. This is not easy. Okay, this part, the what comes in the middle is not easy, because analytics, if done wrong, can lead to incorrect conclusions. And if you make decisions based on incorrect conclusions, you know what might happen. So people have to realize that there's a difference between correlation and causation. Now, correlation is easy to calculate. There's a simple formula, and we have supercomputers that can calculate correlations very easily. But can they find causations? See, that requires human judgment, okay? So for example, correlation does not imply causation. Although causation implies correlation. So this is where you need a statistician, you need an analyst who can understand these things. For example, suppose there's a desired outcome, and we find that variable 1 is positively correlated to this desired outcome. So you say, oh, great, we'll focus on variable 1, increase it so that I have the desired outcome. And you might find that another variable is highly correlated to the desired outcome. So you say, oh, we'll increase variable 2 as well. But what might really be happening is that variable 2 is causing variable 1, and variable 2 is causing this, and variable 1 is just there. But because variable 2 is causing this, and variable 2 is causing this, it appears as if variable 1 might be causing this, but this is just by the way, it just happened to be like that, okay? Now, machines cannot detect this. Human beings have to do this. So for example, high sales are positively correlated with high profit. Okay, that's a no-brainer. So you can say, oh, so let's work on high sales. Well, what's causing high sales? Well, high customer satisfaction. So if you just take care of that, this will automatically happen, and this will automatically happen. So somebody has to sit down and think about the root cause variable. And somebody might ask, well, how do you do high customer satisfaction? Where you say, well, just create high quality products. So that's the root cause, ultimately, of high profits. Well, how do you make high quality products? Well, employ high quality employees. Okay. So if you dig down and find the root cause, only then can you make very good decisions. So that's something for which you need good judgment, good analytics, not something machines can do. Okay. I'll give you another example. Ice cream consumption and drownings positively correlated. Did you know that? Well, relax. This is not causing it. There's a high correlation. That does not mean it's causing it. What's causing it is warm weather. So warm weather increases ice cream consumption. Warm weather takes people outdoors and into the swimming pools and beaches, which causes high drownings. But this is just there. It just happens to be there. This is called spurious correlation. This is called spurious correlation. So machines will not tell you this, okay? And if you only rely on machines to do this, you might say, oh, this is causing this, so let's put a ban on ice cream consumption because we want to save drownings. Okay? Then there's another problem called reverse causality. Married men live longer. Married men live longer. Now, when I tell this relationship to some wives of my friends, they feel very, yeah, because of me, that my husband is living longer. Of course, when I tell this to my male friends, they go like, Anurag, it's not that we live longer, it just seems longer. The truth is, women have an instinct to see if this person is likely to live long. They just have this God-given instinct, and they're looking for husband material who will support and secure the family for a long time. So they just know which one is husband material, and they marry them as opposed to just boyfriend material. So causality, reverse causality. Whenever you see a fire truck, there's a fire somewhere. Reverse causality. Does self-esteem lead to higher grades, or does higher grade lead to self-esteem? Both. So sometimes there's, causation one way, sometimes it's both ways, sometimes it's just reverse. You've got to be very careful about that. So before people realized it's both ways, they actually only thought that self-esteem led to higher grades. So they imposed policies to how teachers can impose higher self-esteem, but then it failed. So now they're trying to change things. Then there's a problem of omitted variables, and this is my last slide. So you're trying to find relationships, but you might omit something. So for example, happiness. Everybody's interested in happiness. Anybody not? I didn't think so.
No, you ain't.
Married. I'm married.
You're married.
Now, so you might think, okay, so what causes happiness? So let's say money, relationships, employment, job satisfaction, social acceptance, domestic harmony, health, education. And let's start putting some weights on them, say 4, 6, 2.5, I'm just making these up. 1.5, 3, 4, 2. And you might not have covered everything, right? Now, if you didn't realize that you missed something, then you would just work on these things. And somebody might tell you, oh, if you have gratitude for little things, that will make you happy. So glad somebody told me, otherwise I would have missed this, So it's an omitted variable problem. Or I don't know if you've seen this, giving and charity makes you happy, okay? In fact, they also found a relationship, if you're more giving and charitable, you make more money. Did you know that?
Yeah.
So if you know this, at the end of the talk, I'll be there accepting some donations for my college. I just want you to be more wealthy. So this is the problem of omitted variable. And somebody might say, wait a second, you didn't include one of the best variables for happiness, meditation. And for all you know, the weight on that might be 100 compared to other things. So it's a problem of omitted variables, something machines will not do. You have to be very careful in your analysis. Okay? So big data is great, it has lots of values, provided you know how to derive that value. Okay. Thank you. Any questions?
Anybody have questions for the doctor?
Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you for your very scholarly presentation. It's very useful.
Big question. The scientist is sitting in his office, and he has over 1 million records in his science, quantitative, qualitative, theoretical. And you mentioned about the machine being able to crunch numbers, but there's a certain amount of decision-making that only the mind can do. But he's got over 1 million records, and he asks this question: what is the next step for my science? How do you do that?
Yeah, very good question. And it borders on academia, where that's what researchers do, ask questions. There's no, unfortunately I don't have a straight answer to that, because it depends on the context and so on. And that's how the world of academia is designed to actually answer that question. So you work in teams, you brainstorm, and that's why interdisciplinary sciences are becoming more popular, because you might think of some way of answering that question which might affect something else that you cannot foresee. And great question. I don't have a very good answer to that. You brainstorm and you think and you rethink and you revise your opinions and you revise your opinion, and that's how knowledge progresses. Thank you. Yes, please.
How much of the data, big data, is backup data?
Yeah, so that really depends on what your data deletion policies are. So obviously data storage, even though it's getting cheaper, is still expensive. And so data centers are expensive and so on. So every organization has policies on backups and how long to keep the backups. But I guess you're more asking in terms of statistics, how much of the zettabytes that we had, how much of that is backup? I really don't know. It really depends on every organization. Every organization has different policies, but at least half of it.
Well, because I was told that a lot of organizations are afraid of losing their data.
Yes.
Because the cloud isn't the cloud.
That's right.
It's storage.
So at least half
So
of it
they-
is, yes.
So they all put it in many different
That's right.
databases,
That's
so they don't
right.
all lose it all at once.
So that's a very good point. A lot of the data is backup data. They also have what are called distributed databases. So the data is distributed. Some are replicated databases, which actually increases the storage capacity a lot more. So yeah, a lot of it is backup and replicated for good reasons. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, please.
One comment and one question. Your correlation information brought back a funny event in my life. I was in college for my master's, did a regression analysis on Sears Roebuck profit margin, and found a direct relation to the amount of beef that was consumed in the United States. Totally, it was 90% correlation.
Really?
That's when I first learned that this is garbage.
Yeah.
My question is,
Yes.
quantum computing is coming along. What's that going to do to everything you've been talking about?
Okay, the question is quantum computing is coming along, and Google just announced it can do quantum computing. It's going to increase the speed at which data can be analyzed. What it will mean is that we will generate more data because we can process it faster. So one reason we are able to increase the velocity of data consumption is because we can process it. So let's suppose there was a huge mismatch between the velocity at which data is arriving and the speed at which we are processing it. If we can't keep up with the data, then we'll stop collecting it because it's going useless. So we'll just have more big data and faster analysis and finer analytics and finer granularity of everything.
But you always need a human factor.
The human factor? Oh, absolutely, because in spite of all the artificial intelligence advancements that you're hearing about, we cannot take away the human element because of some of the problems we talked about, which machines just cannot understand, at least at this point in time. Maybe 100 years from now, they will become more intelligent, I'm sure. Yes.
Isn't that where artificial intelligence comes in, like to kind of fill
Right.
that gap? It's
Yes.
trying to make provide the quote unquote human element.
Absolutely. So that's where the research is progressing. They're trying to capture as much of natural intelligence as possible through artificial intelligence, and it'll keep getting better and better and better. And there's a thing called In artificial intelligence, what's the term where a machine can act as a human being, you cannot tell the difference? A Turing machine. A Turing machine is a concept that you can tell that a machine is intelligent if you cannot tell that it's not a human being based on its interactions. In some areas we are there, in some areas we are not there. We're trying to get there with self-driving cars, but there's too many cases of accidents and pushbacks. Eventually we'll get there, and that's what AI people are trying to do. Yeah.
So are you like a software engineer, are you a computer engineer, are you if someone wanted to study what you're teaching, what path would they
Okay.
go on?
So the question is, what is the career path for getting into these areas? So there's various paths. One is through computer science. You study how computers work, you understand programming languages, you understand how to code computers to make them do whatever you want to do. And you can implement algorithms for artificial intelligence, etc. So as a computer scientist, you can take that route and be hired by Google and Microsoft and Apple. Then there's a business side where you're more interested not so much in the algorithms of how to do artificial intelligence, but how to apply them to business. So then you would not need to know all the algorithm details and all the coding, but you will know a little bit of that you can learn through information systems departments or IT departments in business schools, and then learn about business and see how can improve business. So those are the two main career paths. And you can, or you can go into hardware as an engineer. So for example, quantum computing is a hardware thing. How to completely change the way computers work. So if you want to make contribution in that field, so there's several pathways. Mine was, I learned a little bit of computer science and a little bit of business, and I'm trying to combine the two, and a little bit of analytics. So analytics is another completely different path where you can become a student of statistics. And you're not concerned with how it's computing, but you're concerned with how to do good analysis. So all the things we talked about correlation and causation, are things you learn as a statistics student. Thank you.
Before you sit down, we have a program called Books for Kids, and in about 123 classrooms in Sarasota and Manatee counties, volunteers who are Rotarians and non-Rotarians go in and read a book to a child, same classroom, once a month. So in honor of your presentation today, we are going to donate 3 books in your name to children, and they get to take the book and keep it home, and it'll have a label inside the book.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We appreciate it so much. Which in turn now, Books for Kids